Afternoon Adventures! Welcome back to this series with the Divine Soul and the metamagic. This time we're doing 3rd level Cleric spells, which is exciting. It is an even longer list than 2nd level spells, so I'm going to try and power through them without rambling too much. We'll see what happens. Let's start right in without any further ado, because I don't want this video to be too super long. We're going to start off on a weird note with Animate Dead. The only metamagic that this is really eligible for is Subtle, and even then I can only really imagine Subtle being useful in niche situations. Subtle spell I usually use to either avoid being counterspelled, which if you're taking the time to animate dead, you're probably not worried about counterspell, and using it in social situations so that people who maybe wouldn't be too friendly to me casting a spell don't notice that I'm casting a spell. However, they're going to notice when a zombie comes up out the ground, so unless I'm trying to deceive some poor NPC into believing their town has a zombie problem, I don't really see a use for this. So I'm going to power ahead to Beacon of Hope. Beacon of Hope is interesting because it pairs with other healing magic. It maximizes the die rolls for any healing that anyone in its area receives. It also doesn't really work with metamagic except for Extended. And Extended normally probably isn't important, but I'll touch on that more later. You can also, not a metamagic thing, but if you have later in the game the spell Simulacrum or Simulacrum, still not sure how that's pronounced, you can have your sim cast Beacon of Hope while you crank out some healing, or vice versa. And again, we're going to touch on that more later. Bestow Curse and Clairvoyance can both be cast as distant spells or as extended spells. Clairvoyance has some interesting interaction with distant spell because, unlike extended, distant spell doesn't have an upper bound. So the 1 mile, not radius, but range on Clairvoyance can actually be doubled to 2 miles for reconnaissance. And the extended metamagic can apply to Bestow Curse in an interesting way if you cast Bestow Curse as a 5th level spell, because casting as a 5th level spell removes the need for concentration and makes the duration 8 hours, which can be doubled to 16 hours. Clairvoyance can also be extended, although its duration is only 10 minutes to start, but having 20 minutes of reconnaissance could be a good thing, especially if you're trying to spy on someone in an important meeting, or drafting an important document and you want time to see how that ends up. Create Food and Water is another out-of-combat utility spell. Doesn't really have metamagics that work well with it. You could cast it as a subtle spell, again if you're trying to hide the fact that it's you casting the spell. Maybe you're a humble character who doesn't want praise for helping to solve a hunger problem in a small village or something. I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of to do with it. Use your imagination, I guess. Daylight, Feign Death, Magic Circle, and Water Walk all have durations of 1 hour, not requiring concentration, which makes them prime candidates for the extended spell metamagic. Although Water Walk is also a ritual, so if you don't need to worry about that middle time where it might be down for a few minutes, or you might have to spend the last 10 minutes of its duration casting as a ritual, you could still get 2 hours out of it without spending any resources. But for other circumstances, and for the other 3 spells, 1 sorcery point gets you an extra hour. That's basically worth a 3rd level spell slot, because you don't have to cast it a second time. So that's some great value. That's about all you can do metamagic wise with those spells, as again they are pretty much utility. Dispel Magic can be cast as a subtle spell, strong against spellcasters. If you've been keeping up with the series, you've heard me say that before. I will say it again. Casting as a subtle spell prevents you from being counterspelled, so being able to cast Dispel Magic on, say, a powerful archmage, a powerful spellcaster who has buffs on themselves, It allows you to remove them, and if you can do it without getting counterspelled, even better. You can also cast Dispel Magic as a distance spell, although it already has a pretty substantial range of 120 feet, so getting more distance out of it is often not going to be necessary, but is an option. Glyph of Warding isn't eligible for any metamagic, as far as I can tell. It just isn't. I guess technically you could cast it as a distance spell to inscribe the glyph on something 30 feet away, although the description of the spell does say things like you inscribe runes on a surface or an object, so I could see it being ruled that you have to physically write on a thing. Distance spell metamagic doesn't make a lot of sense, but mechanically, technically it works. That said, I can't really think of a reason you'd need to cast it as a distance spell, as anything you would want the glyph on should be close enough to either you or your ally or an enemy to actually go off. So take that as you will. Mass Healing Word is a great spell for getting some healing onto your party when maybe you've all collectively taken a small amount of damage, or perhaps the enemies are dividing up their hits onto multiple allies. You can help mitigate that damage, or if multiple of your allies have been knocked onto the ground, you can pick them back up with some magic healing on up to 6 creatures. Mass Healing Word can benefit from the distance spell metamagic, doubling its range from 60 to 120 feet. Normally, it's not too hard to position yourself so that 60 feet is enough to catch all 6 creatures that you want to heal with the spell, but it is an option if your party is quite spread out, or if you would prefer to keep away from the front line and stay safe yourself while also healing your frontliners, your fighters and barbarians, etc. You could cast it as a distance spell. You could also cast it as a subtle spell if you feel you're at risk of being counterspelled in a crucial moment where you need to revive some of your enemies from 0 HP. Getting counterspelled in that instance could go very, very badly for your team, so keeping yourself safe from that could be a strong option in some situations. Meld into Stone is another sort of out-of-combat utility spell, and doesn't really gain benefit from many metamagics, actually isn't eligible for that many metamagics. The only one I could think of really getting use out of would be the extended spell metamagic, doubling its duration from 8 to 16 hours, although why you would want to sit in a wall or a statue or some other stone object for that long is a little unclear to me, probably very situational. But if you want to, that is an option. Protection from Energy falls into the same category that Protection from Poison did last video, the 2nd level spell. It gives one ally, which could be yourself, resistance to one of a specific list of damage types for 1 hour. It's eligible for extended spell. It can also be twinned onto multiple creatures, so that multiple creatures can have resistance to, say, fire before you walk into the volcano. Remove Curse, again, out of combat utility type. Could be used in combat, I suppose, if an enemy casts Bestow Curse or some other thing. Maybe a Lycanthrope hits you and you come down with the Lycanthropy. Someone's got to cast a Remove Curse on you. But basically the only thing I could think for this one is Twin Spell. If multiple creatures get cursed at the same time, you could take it off both. That's about it. You cast it as distant. Probably not necessary most of the time, as with a lot of the out-of-combat stuff. Revivify is another great in or out-of-combat spell for picking someone back up from literally dead, and can be used as a distance spell to give it a range of 30 feet. That's super useful if someone dies right next to something big and evil, a big nasty creature that you don't want to risk getting hit by. And can also benefit from the twin spell metamagic, which is exciting because Revivify costs 300 gold piece worth of diamonds, and if you twin it, that doesn't increase the cost, so you're effectively halving the cost for reviving 2 creatures at once. which is primo. Well worth the 3 sorcery points. 3. Sending can technically be twinned, because you're sending a message to one creature, targets one creature, so you can send a message to 2 creatures. Now, I would think, and as a DM I would probably rule, it would have to be the same message, because you're making the spell target 2 creatures, you're not casting the spell twice. And that's about the only metamagic it's eligible for. Well, I guess you could quicken it, but why? It already has an unlimited range, even to other planes. Speak with Dead isn't also really worth using metamagic on, because even though it has a duration of 10 minutes, you only get to ask 5 questions, regardless how long that takes. You could ask 5 questions in 30 seconds, or you could ask 5 questions across the whole 20 minutes. It doesn't really matter. So, save your sorcery points, just cast it once, you have 10 full minutes to ask 5 questions. Spirit Guardians, such a great cleric spell, so good. And Spirit Guardians has a duration of 10 minutes, which means it can be extended, which is actually useful for Spirit Guardians, because that means you can walk into enemy territory and probably get multiple fights out of it. I've had, even without extended spell, I've had players, and I myself sometimes, get 2 or even 3 fights with one casting of Spirit Guardians. As long as you're moving room to room and you're not dilly-dallying too long in each one, you can plow through quite a few enemies with the spell still active. So doubling its duration makes that even more possible, even more likely. Otherwise, it isn't really eligible for much, although if you have a DM who likes to have you roll damage once, like on your turn, and have it last the entire round, with that same damage dealt to everyone in the area, or have you roll the damage once when you cast the spell and then use that for the whole casting of the spell, which personally I don't really like. But if your DM does that, empowered metamagic to re-roll any low dice that you may have rolled, and then your higher damage roll lasts for that longer time, even better. Tongues is a useful spell for communicating with creatures who don't speak the languages you speak, and don't speak the languages that anyone in your party speaks. Being able to cast a spell and now you can communicate with anyone, or a creature you touch can communicate with anyone. So if you can sort of use body language to try to like shake someone's hand or something, try and get that physical contact, you could cast Tongues as a subtle spell to not put them on edge further, because if I didn't understand what someone was saying and they started casting a spell, I would be concerned. So subtle spell can help alleviate that. If you can get that physical contact, you can make it so that they understand you and all your party, and anything they say can be understood by you and your party. Or you could cast it as a subtle spell on yourself or an ally to make them the spokesperson for your party and communicate with this other person or people who normally don't understand you. You could also, if you feel you can get away with casting a spell in the presence of this mystery person, you could cast as a distance spell to, again, give them that ability. You could also extend it, because the spell lasts long enough to make that matter, although in most situations, unless you know going into it that you're not going to be able to communicate with the languages you have at your disposal, it is probably better to use distant or subtle when you're in that conversation. If you're already in that conversation, I should say. So that's all the spells from the player's handbook. There was one spell added to the cleric list at 3rd level by Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and that is Life Transference. Life Transference is interesting because you hurt yourself with necrotic damage to heal someone else. And because of that, there's some question as to whether it can be twinned, because technically it affects 2 creatures. It hurts you and heals someone else. But I don't think it would break anything to allow it. I've seen it used twinned. I've seen DMs allow that. I think it's fine. From like an in-world standpoint, I think it makes sense to heal creatures, and that damage to you is just a cost of the spell rather than an effect. But it's worth talking to your DM about. It is a pretty good healing spell, considering just the amount that you heal, because it has that limiting factor, that balancing factor, the cost of your own HP. Other than twin, you can also quicken it, and then follow up by drinking a potion, for example, or perhaps using the healer's feet, the healer's kit with the healer feet to bandage yourself up and restore some of those hit points that you just lost. I believe that would be an effective strategy. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything added 2 spells at 3rd level to the Cleric spell list. The new Spirit Shroud, which kind of wants to be a weird hybrid of Spirit Guardians and Holy Weapon, which we'll touch on later. It's a 5th level spell, given that it gives you an area where it slows enemies down a little bit, and your attacks against creatures within that 10-foot radius deal extra damage. This spell I see being most useful on something like a Warlock, or maybe a Paladin, someone who can get several attacks out each round after casting it. Whereas on a Cleric, you don't get extra attack, and you don't really get spells that have multiple attack rolls, like Scorching Ray. Although, as a Divine Soul Sorcerer, you do get Scorching Ray. So, casting Spirit Shroud and then following up next turn with Scorching Ray, especially an upcast one, for more beams, could actually add quite a bit of damage, especially if you also cast Spirit Shroud at, say, a 5th level. Every other level that you upcast it, it gains an additional d8. So, being able to stack damage on something like Scorching Ray, or on something like Eldritch Blast if you have it, can pretty quickly rack up a lot of damage. As for metamagic for Spirit Shroud, there's not really a lot you can do with it. Its duration is only a minute. Its casting time's already a bonus action. Its range is self. So it kind of just is what it is. You could cast it as a subtle spell, I suppose, to prevent counterspelling. But yeah, that's about all I can think of. But the spell I was most excited for when I read that it was added to the Cleric list by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything was Aura of Vitality. This spell is already phenomenal, and in the hands of a Cleric and in the hands of a Divine Soul Sorcerer, it just keeps getting better. So it used to be a Paladin only spell, a 3rd level spell, which meant Paladins could only acquire it at level 9 or higher, and Bards could acquire it at level 6 if you're a lore bard, 10 if you're not. And the spell heals, uses your bonus action each turn, if you choose to use it each turn, to restore 2d6 hit points to a creature, I should say, within 30 feet of you, including yourself. So it lasts a minute, and basically you get 10 heals of 2d6, total of 20d6. Now that it's on the Cleric spell list, Clerics can get it as early as level 5, and can cast it at higher levels, cast it all day long, between every fight if you want to. And as a Divine Soul, you can cast it as an extended spell. The amount of times you can heal with Aura of Vitality is based entirely on its duration. So, over the course of its normal 1 minute duration, you can do 10 heals of 2d6. So if you double its duration to 2 minutes, you can get 20 heals of 2d6, total of 40d6. That's a significant amount for a 3rd level spell. And it gets even better if you have a level of Life Cleric. If you have a level of Life Cleric, you get the ability Disciple of Life, which adds 2 plus the spell's level each time you heal a creature with a spell. Note that doesn't say 1 healing roll of the spell. like many other features do for healing and damage and etc. It says when you heal a creature with a spell, you heal extra. That applies to all 20 of these heals. So as a Divine Soul 5, at least, Life Cleric 1, at least, you can cast Aura of Vitality as an extended spell, heal 20 times for 2d6 plus 5 points of healing. Total of an average of 240 points. Granted, it takes you 2 minutes to do that, so it's not viable in combat. Although the spell is also pretty good in combat as well. For reference, the level 6 spell Heal restores 70 hit points to one creature. Now that only takes an action, but you can see how a 3rd level spell healing 240 points kind of shifts the balance. But we can push it a step further, with either another character willing to cast the spell twice, or a simulacrum, I still don't know how that's pronounced, who can cast Beacon of Hope as an extended spell. You can maximize the rolls on all those 2d6s, making each heal 12 points, or 17 points if you have Disciple of Life. If you have Disciple of Life and 20 heals of 17, that's an average of 340 points of healing. And by average, I mean that's the actual amount, because that's your rolling max on each die. I don't know why I said average. The point is, if you want to be an insane support character, Aura of Vitality is a must. Even if you want to be just like a normal sorcerer with one healing spell, Aura of Vitality is the one to get. Anyway, I've rambled long enough about this amazing healing spell. That is all of the 3rd level spells for clerics, and how, at least in my opinion, they can be best interacted with given the metamagic options the sorcerer has. So, thank you for watching. That's all I got for you today. Leave a like if you want. I can't make you. Leave a comment if you want. It's your choice. Subscribe if you want. The algorithm still doesn't know me, so it might not suggest the next one to you. So if you want to watch the rest, subscribe button's down there. You know that. You know how YouTube works. I'm going to stop rambling because my voice is getting dry. I need more iced tea. Peace.